Are you someone who's unhappy with Star Wars The Last Jedi and the direction of the Star Wars movie universe as it is? Well, I've got some news for you. If that's how you feel, your opinions are in the minority and don't matter. And most of what you're seeing online and from other people online about the hatred of it, it's all bots or mostly bots and Russian trolls. Only a very small percentage of the people who saw The Last Jedi didn't like it. So don't worry. Everything that Kathleen Kennedy and Ryan Johnson and Lucasfilm is doing is great. Or at least that's what it appears that this one study and a lot of journalists and people running with it want you to believe. And I think that for the most part, this is BS. And I'll go through with it first. Well, I'll explain it. So let's talk about why people are many people are saying this right now. There was a study originally called Weaponizing the Haters, The Last Jedi, and the Strategic Politicization of Pop Culture Through Social Media Manipulation, that basically says that most of what you're seeing, what you saw in 2017 online, and I think maybe since then, with people like, trashing The Last Jedi and stuff, that was mostly Russian bots and things like that, and not genuine people. And it was reported on, I think yesterday, by The Hollywood Reporter, in an article called Star Wars The Last Jedi, Negative A Buzz Amplified by Russian Trolls Study Finds. Now, I am not necessarily saying that there weren't trolls online and bots, escalating or exacerbating fan displeasure that was already there. That may have in fact been a factor, but a lot of the implied messaging of this and the way a lot of journalists and people online are reporting this is that most of the people who have been the most vocal and who are unhappy, most fans who didn't like The Last Jedi, it wasn't really people. It was it was trolls and hackers and bots. And that the vast majority of people who saw The Last Jedi and liked it, they represent the real fans or most people. And I just think if that's the message that they want us to get from this data, it's the wrong message and it's inaccurate, and I just don't believe it. But let's go into more about what the Hollywood Reporter says about this report. The likely objective of these measures is increasing media coverage of the fandom conflict, thereby adding to and further propagating a narrative of widespread discord and dysfunction in American society. Persuading voters of this narrative remains a strategic goal for the U.S. alt-right movement, as well as the Russian Federation. Now, like I said, I'm sure that's maybe a component of it. I mean, that, things can be manipulated and escalated online to stoke online hysteria. But trust me, a lot of regular average people or normal people didn't like that movie. And it, if it's being escalated, then yeah, but let's not pretend that people stoking the flames, that if they weren't there, if there were no Russian hackers or trolls or anything, that, half the people who saw The Last Jedi would have suddenly liked it or whatever. That's not true. I don't believe that for a second. And this guy who wrote this article, this study, what's his name? Morton Bay. He's not necessarily saying that, I think, either, but the way it's being reported on by a lot of journalists, that kind of seems to be what they're saying. The paper analyzes in depth the negative online reaction, which is split into three different camps: those with a political agenda, trolls, and what Bay calls real fantagonists, which he defines as genuine Star Wars fans disappointed in the movie. His findings are fascinating. Overall, 50.9% of those tweeting negatively about the movie was likely politically motivated or not even human. He writes, noting that only 21.9% of tweets analyzed about the movie had been negative in the first place. Well, maybe, but you gotta look. I think that the displeasure with The Last Jedi and Star Wars in general goes beyond tweets and Twitter. When the box office fallout for The Last Jedi, plummeted, and when Solo tanked because people wanted to send a message to Disney and Kathleen Kennedy, those weren't Russian bots or trolls, unless they found a way to manipulate how people spend money on movies. The online ticket sales and stuff. But that's that I don't think that's the case. A number of these users appear to be Russian trolls. Bay writes of the negative tweets. Moreover, he suggests complaints about Lucasfilm's reported politicization of the franchise by many of the disaffected fans says more about the fans than it does Disney or Lucasfilm's treatment of it. Since the political and ethical positions presented in the new film are consistent with the older films, it is more likely that the polarization of the Trump era has politicized the fans. So basically, now it's like Donald Trump and the political divide in America's fault. The divisive political discourse of the study period and the months leading up to it has likely primed these fans with a particular type of political messaging that is in direct conflict with the values presented in The Last Jedi. But see, here's the thing about why people don't like The Last Jedi and why people are unhappy with Star Wars right now. I mean, I know that, politics and the agenda is part of it, but I don't think that's the number one reason people are unhappy with Star Wars and The Last Jedi are unhappy with it. It's story. It's the way that, like, classic legacy characters are being treated, like Luke, Han, and Leia, and the way that and Admiral Akbar, the way that they have kind of been kicked to the side and, forcibly retired, so to speak, and being written and treated like punks and being disrespected to make way for newer characters who, while cool, the audience hasn't had any time to warm up to them the way that they do the old ones. And, they don't want to see their old favorites being pushed out so soon before they've really gotten to know these new heroes like Rey and Finn and stuff that well. I mean, it's just like, are these new characters enough to anchor a franchise after these other characters have been like anchor it for like 30 or 40 years? That, I think, is the reason a lot of people are upset, which this study doesn't address, and which they seem to be saying is the only reason people are unhappy with The Last Jedi. And even then, like I said, Twitter, while important, is not the extent of the problem, of what you use to gauge the problem. I mean, if Twitter wasn't there, I think The Last Jedi would have still been polarizing. And last in this article, it says, in response to a tweet announcing the release of the paper, this study that has, this data I'm talking about, Last Jedi director Rian Johnson shared the tweet, adding, looking forward to reading it, but what the top line describes is consistent with my experience online. Well, I'm sure Rian Johnson has gotten a lot of online hatred, on Twitter and elsewhere. And, I'm not going to say that, Russian trolls or like hackers weren't part of that. As I said before, maybe I'm sure that was a factor. I'm not going to say that these findings are bogus. But what I don't like is the implied message. Like it was Russian trolls or trolls in general. This isn't real. There are no people or not that many people who are unhappy. Not because, Lucasfilm didn't like follow what fans wanted or Rian Johnson didn't either or Kathleen Kennedy. They're fine. It's all, a conspiracy or mostly a conspiracy. That's bogus, and I don't like, I don't want people to point to this as a reason to invalidate fan unhappiness that exists, which I kind of see like a lot of people already starting to do. So we'll see. Well, we'll see how this plays out in the future, but I call BS on a lot of reading between the lines what a lot of this is saying and what a lot of people are doing with it. But what do you think? Do you believe that, this fan division and stuff is no big deal and it was all the Russians and the bots and that The Last Jedi was a masterpiece and most people would have liked if there were no such thing as Russian bots and trolls? Or just, I don't even know. I don't think we should be saying blame the Russians. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't want to say anything like that, but I think you know what I mean. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel because I appreciate your viewership and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.